How many times have you tried to fix someone's life? How many times have you made their problems your problems? And what happened? Did they change, or did you just exhaust yourself? Today, I'm going to tell you something that might disturb you. Helping others can become a disease, and you might already be infected. You see, there's something rather peculiar about our modern understanding of goodness. We've been conditioned to believe that a good person, a spiritual person, a loving person must always say yes, must always give, must always be available. And if you hesitate, if you pause, if you dare to set a boundary, well, then something must be wrong with you. You must be selfish. You must be cold. But what if I told you this entire notion is backwards? What if the compulsive need to rescue everyone, to fix everyone, to save everyone from their own lives is not love at all, but a sophisticated form of control? A way of avoiding your own inner work by staying perpetually busy with everyone else's drama. There's something deeply seductive about being needed. It gives us a sense of purpose, a feeling of importance, a reason to exist. But when this need to be needed becomes compulsive, when it drives every interaction and relationship, it stops being about love and starts being about addiction. Think about it for a moment. When you continually rescue someone from the consequences of their own choices, what are you really doing? You think you're helping them, but are you? Or are you actually keeping them trapped in a state of dependence, preventing them from discovering their own strength, their own capacity to handle life? There's an unspoken contract in every rescue relationship. I will save you, and in return, you will need me. This arrangement serves both parties on a surface level, but beneath it lies a profound disrespect for the other person's potential. You're essentially communicating that you don't believe they're capable of growth, change, or resilience. Let me tell you what's really happening here. Every time you rush in to save someone, you're sending them a clear message. I don't believe you're capable of handling this yourself. You're essentially telling them they're weak, incompetent, unable to figure things out. And over time, they begin to believe this. They begin to see themselves as victims who need constant rescue. But here's the part that might shock you. You need them to need you. Because without someone to save, who would you be? Your entire identity has become wrapped up in being the helper, the fixer, the savior. And this is where it gets dangerous, because you're not actually helping anyone. You're feeding your own ego while keeping others small. I want you to imagine something. Imagine you're walking by a river and you see someone struggling in the water. Your natural instinct is to jump in and save them, right? But what if every time you walk by this river, the same person was there, struggling in the same spot, and every time you rescued them, they went right back to the same dangerous place? At what point would you realize that your rescuing isn't helping? At what point would you understand that you might actually be enabling their reckless behavior? This is exactly what happens with emotional rescue patterns. You keep pulling people out of their self-created problems, and they keep creating the same problems again. They never learn to swim because you keep doing the swimming for them. What makes this pattern so persistent is that it feels good to both parties in the short term. You feel valuable and needed. They feel taken care of and relieved of responsibility. But in the long term, it creates a toxic dynamic where both people become smaller versions of themselves. Now, let me be very clear about something. I'm not suggesting you become heartless or indifferent. That would be another extreme, wouldn't it? The question is not whether you should care about people. The question is how you care. And more importantly, who deserves your precious energy? Because you see, there are certain types of people who will drain you completely dry. They will take everything you have to give and then demand more. And the tragedy is not that they're taking. The tragedy is that by constantly giving to them, you're preventing them from growing up. The first type is what I call the chronically lazy. Now, there's a difference between someone who is struggling and someone who has simply given up. A person who is struggling will use your help as a stepping stone to something better. But the chronically lazy person will use your help as a permanent hammock. These people have made a decision, whether conscious or not, that life is too difficult and someone else should carry their weight. The moment you step in to help them, you become that someone else. Not because they can't do things themselves, but because they've discovered that if they wait long enough, act helpless enough, someone will always do it for them. Watch what happens in nature. A bird doesn't continue bringing food to a chick that refuses to learn to fly. A tree doesn't keep nourishing a branch that produces no fruit. Nature has a wisdom about this that we seem to have lost. If something is not growing, not contributing, not making an effort, it gets cut off. Not out of cruelty, but out of wisdom. The chronically lazy person will always have an excuse. They'll tell you about their difficult childhood, their bad luck, their unfair circumstances, and some of this might even be true. But here's the question you must ask. What are they doing about it right now? Are they taking any steps, however small, to change their situation, or are they simply waiting for the next person to come along and rescue them? What's particularly insidious about this dynamic is how it slowly erodes your own energy and optimism. You start believing in their limitations more than they do. You begin to see them as fragile, incapable, permanently damaged. And this perception becomes a prison for both of you. When you help someone who refuses to help themselves, you rob them of something precious. You rob them of the satisfaction that comes from overcoming difficulty. You rob them of the strength that builds through struggle. You rob them of the very thing they need most, the discovery that they are far more capable than they believed. The second type of person you must recognize is the perpetually ungrateful. Have you ever given someone an extraordinary gift and watched them treat it like nothing? You could give them your time, your money, your energy, your very heart, and they would take it without a second thought. No thank you, no acknowledgement, no appreciation whatsoever. These people have trained themselves to see every kindness as ordinary, every sacrifice as expected. They've developed a mental framework where they are perpetually owed something by the universe, and your generosity simply pays down a debt that can never be fully satisfied. This is not accidental. This is a character issue. Gratitude is not just good manners. Gratitude is the sign of a person who understands they are connected to something larger than themselves. A grateful person recognizes that every blessing, every gift, every act of kindness is not owed to them, but given freely. But the ungrateful person believes the world owes them everything. They believe your help is their right, not your gift. And the more you give to them, the more entitled they become. It's a strange paradox. The more you pour into them, the less they appreciate it. I once knew someone who helped a friend pay rent for 6 months straight. Month after month, he sacrificed his own comfort to ensure this friend had shelter. And how did the friend respond? He complained. He complained that the apartment was too small, the neighborhood wasn't nice enough, that he had to live this way while others had more. Not once did he express genuine gratitude. Not once did he acknowledge the sacrifice being made for him. The helper began to notice something disturbing. The more he gave, the more entitled his friend became. It was as if the generosity had created an expectation that this was simply how things should be. The friend had psychologically reframed the assistance from gift to obligation. And when the 6 months ended and the help could no longer continue, the friend became angry. He felt betrayed, as if the assistance he had received was not a gift, but a debt that was being unfairly called in. This is the nature of the ungrateful. They don't see kindness, they see weakness. They don't see generosity, they see opportunity. When you help an ungrateful person, you're not planting seeds in fertile soil. You're throwing them into a bottomless pit. And no matter how much you give, the pit will never be filled. The third type is the arrogant and self-righteous. These people don't want your help. They want your validation. They don't want your wisdom. They want you to confirm what they already believe about themselves. If you dare to offer anything that challenges their self-image, they will reject you entirely. The arrogant person is not suffering from a lack of knowledge. They're suffering from excessive pride. They believe they already know everything they need to know. They believe their way is the only right way, and anyone who suggests otherwise is simply wrong. Pride is a curious thing. It masquerades as confidence, but it's actually fear. The arrogant person is terrified of being wrong because their entire identity is built on being right. If they admit they don't know something, if they acknowledge they need help, their whole sense of self begins to crumble. You cannot help a person like this, not because they're beyond help, but because they don't believe they need it. And until they reach that realization themselves, anything you offer will be wasted effort. The hardest part about dealing with arrogant people is that they often have just enough knowledge to sound convincing. They can quote studies, cite experts, and present logical arguments for why their approach is superior. But wisdom and knowledge are not the same thing. Knowledge can be accumulated. Wisdom must be earned through experience and often through failure. Even spiritual teachers understood this principle. They didn't chase after people who weren't ready to listen. They said what needed to be said and moved on, understanding that you cannot force wisdom on someone who is committed to their own foolishness. The arrogant person must fall before they can rise. They must experience the consequences of their pride before they become humble enough to receive guidance. Here's what I want you to understand about all of this. When you compulsively rescue people, you're not actually loving them. You're loving the feeling you get from being needed. You're addicted to being seen as the good person, the helpful one, the savior, and this addiction is keeping both you and them trapped in unhealthy patterns. True love sometimes looks like stepping back. True compassion sometimes means allowing people to experience the full weight of their choices, because it's often through difficulty, through hitting bottom, through facing consequences that people finally wake up and take responsibility for their lives. Think about your own life for a moment. When did you grow the most? When did you develop the most strength and wisdom? Was it during the easy times when someone was handling everything for you? Or was it during the difficult periods when you had to figure things out yourself, when you had to dig deep and discover resources you didn't know you had? The same is true for everyone else. Growth happens through challenge, not through rescue. Strength develops through struggle, not through being carried. Wisdom emerges through making mistakes and learning from them, not through having someone else make all the decisions. This is perhaps one of the most counterintuitive truths about human development. We don't help people by making their lives easier. We help them by believing in their capacity to handle difficulty and by stepping back when appropriate to let that capacity develop. When you constantly intervene in other people's learning processes, you're essentially treating them like children who can't be trusted with their own lives. And over time, they begin to see themselves this way. They become dependent not just on your help, but on the idea that they need help to function. But here's the deeper issue. Your compulsion to rescue others is often about avoiding your own inner work. It's much easier to focus on someone else's problems than to face your own fears, your own shadows, your own areas that need attention. Staying busy with other people's drama becomes a sophisticated form of procrastination. This is what psychologists call projection. We see in others what we cannot bear to see in ourselves. The person you're desperately trying to save might be reflecting back aspects of your own life that feel out of control. The weakness you're trying to fix in them might be the very weakness you refuse to acknowledge in yourself. Every moment you spend trying to fix someone else is a moment you're not spending on your own growth, your own healing, your own development. And ironically, the more whole and healthy you become, the more genuinely helpful you can be to others. But you have to do your own work first. So what does this mean practically? Does it mean you should never help anyone? Of course not. It means you need to learn discernment. You need to recognize the difference between someone who is genuinely struggling and could benefit from temporary support and someone who has made helplessness their lifestyle. Here's a simple test. When you help someone, do they use that help to become stronger, or do they immediately need more help? True need is temporary and specific. Someone might need assistance getting back on their feet after a genuine crisis, but they won't need ongoing rescue from the same problems over and over again. Look for these signs. Is the person taking any steps to improve their situation, or are they completely passive? Do they show genuine gratitude for help received, or do they treat your assistance as their due? Are they willing to examine their own patterns and take responsibility? Or do they blame everyone and everything else for their circumstances? When you help the right people at the right time, you see fruit, you see growth, you see them use your assistance as a springboard to something better. But when you give to those who aren't ready, who don't want to change, who only want to use you, all you see is waste. Your precious energy, gone without creating any positive change. The difference is profound and observable. Someone who genuinely benefits from help will show you progress, not just gratitude. They'll take initiative. They'll ask thoughtful questions. They'll implement suggestions and report back on results. They treat your input as fuel for their own engine, not as a replacement for having an engine at all. Your time is finite. Your energy is limited. Your emotional resources are not endless. You must be wise about where you invest them. Not everyone deserves your help, and recognizing this is not cruelty, it's wisdom. This might sound harsh, but consider this. Every hour you spend trying to rescue someone who doesn't want to change is an hour you could have spent with someone who is genuinely ready to grow. Every ounce of energy you pour into a bottomless pit is energy that could have been used to create something beautiful and meaningful. Here's the most important thing I can tell you. You cannot save anyone. You can offer tools. You can provide temporary support. You can share wisdom and perspective. But ultimately, each person must save themselves. They must do their own inner work, make their own choices, walk their own path. What's remarkable is what happens when you finally accept this truth. You stop attracting people who want to be rescued, and you start attracting people who want to grow. You stop being seen as a resource to be depleted, and you start being seen as an inspiration to be followed. Your relationships transform from draining to energizing. When you accept this truth, everything changes. You stop taking responsibility for other people's lives. You stop feeling guilty when you can't fix their problems. You stop exhausting yourself trying to force growth in people who aren't ready to grow. But this shift isn't always easy. There's often a period of adjustment where you feel guilty for setting boundaries, where you question whether you're being selfish. This is normal. You're breaking patterns that have been reinforced for years, perhaps decades. You might find that some people react strongly when you stop rescuing them. They might accuse you of being cold or uncaring. They might even try to manipulate you back into the helper role by creating bigger crises or more dramatic situations. This is what I call the extinction burst, the final desperate attempt to restore the old dynamic. Instead, you focus on becoming the most authentic, healthy, conscious version of yourself. And from that place of genuine wholeness, you can offer support when appropriate, without attachment to the outcome. You can be genuinely helpful without being codependent. This is what real service looks like. Showing up as your fullest self, offering what you can give freely, and then releasing any need to control how your gift is received or used. When you operate from this space, you attract people who are ready to grow, and you naturally repel those who only want to take. So ask yourself today, who are you helping that you should let go? Who are you rescuing that needs to learn to swim? Who are you enabling that needs to experience the consequences of their choices? And when you find the answer, have the courage to step back. Not with anger or resentment, but with the understanding that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is allow someone to discover their own strength. This isn't abandonment, it's tough love in its truest form. You might feel guilty at first. That's normal. You've been conditioned to believe that withholding help makes you a bad person. But consider this. Is keeping someone weak really an act of love? Is preventing someone from growing really kindness? The guilt you feel when you stop rescuing people is often not about them at all. It's about the story you've told yourself about who you are. I'm the person who helps. I'm the one people can count on. I'm the fixer. But what if your identity doesn't have to be built on other people's dysfunction? Because in the end, real help doesn't create dependency. Real love doesn't keep people small. Real compassion empowers others to become the fullest expression of themselves. And sometimes that requires you to get out of the way and let them figure it out for themselves. The question isn't whether you should care about people. The question is whether you're caring for them in a way that actually serves their highest good, or just your need to feel needed. And that, my friends, makes all the difference in the world.